In this video, I'd like to do something a little bit different than what we have done previously. What I would actually like to do in this particular video is to completely recreate the main functionality, the CRUD of our colors example, but I want to do it all here as quickly as possible in just a single video. The way I'm actually going to do this is I'm going to drop out onto my command line here. I already have my computer set up in the way that it needs to be set up in order for me to do what I need to do. You probably won't be able to follow along with me if that's what you've typically been doing, so for this one, maybe just kind of pay attention and take a couple notes. What I'm actually going to do here on my command line is I'm going to start off by typing Rails new colors. I'm going to hit the enter key, and here within just a couple of seconds what's actually happened is the majority of my application has actually been built for me automatically. Once that command is complete, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to change directories over to the new directory that was created for me by that command, and what I'm then going to do is I'm then going to type Rails G. I'm going to say scaffold color. I'm going to say that I want each color to have a name. I want each color to have a red value, each color to have a green value, and each color to have a blue value. Then I'm going to go ahead and hit the enter key again. And what's going to happen is that command is going to generate a lot of the other files that weren't generated for me by the first command. Once that one's complete, I'm going to type rakedb migrate, hit the enter key. What that command is going to do is get my database all set up for me. And at that point, if I just type Rails S and hit enter, that will actually start up a web server for me. If I then jump over to my web browser, in my web browser I'm going to go to localhost port 3000/colors, and when I hit the enter key, up comes my application. This is essentially like my index page that we had before on our colors application. I have a link here to go create a new color. If I go ahead and click on that, here is my new form. Here on my new form, if I create a new color, let's say black, I can specify the red value, green value, and blue value. When I ask it to create it, it does it. This is my show page. If I choose to edit my color, I could hit edit. I could then maybe turn my color into almost black, where instead of zeros, maybe I'll set the values to all ones. Tell it to update the color. Again, this is like my show page. We just saw the edit page. And if I go back, I'm back at my index page where I can see a listing for the new color that I created. Maybe I'll go ahead and create another new color. I'll create the color white, fill in the values for it like we've done a million times before, tell it to create. When I click back, I'm back at my index, and now in my database I've created an almost black color and a white color. So at this point, what I've effectively done with this little application is I have completely recreated the entire core CRUD system that we put together for our colors example, but here I did it in a matter of minutes, really. I didn't time myself to see how long it actually took, but it was obviously much quicker than the hours and hours that we have spent working on our colors example in PHP. You might say, well, this doesn't look like our PHP example. Well, no, it doesn't right now. What's important, though, is that the functionality is there. If I just went and did a little bit of work on the HTML for this example and brought over my CSS style sheets from our previous example, there's no reason that this one couldn't end up looking exactly like what we've been working on. So how was it that I was actually able to do this quickly? Have I just been messing with you all semester, showing you the slow, hard way to do all of these things? No, not exactly. What I actually did here in this particular example when I created this colors application was I did it using a different product in a way. Here I'm not actually using PHP at all. What I'm using is a different web application framework, a different server-side scripting language. This one is called Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails and PHP are sort of cousins in a way, in that they are both primarily intended to be server-side scripting languages. So just like we've spent all of our videos, all of our semester up to this point learning to write applications with PHP, basically scripts that we put on a server that are executed in response to a URL request, Ruby on Rails fundamentally does the same thing. It just does it differently. When we write our PHP scripts, we generally write them in the language of PHP, if you want to think of it that way. When we write Ruby on Rails scripts, what we generally write them in is the language of Ruby. So Ruby is fundamentally a different language than PHP is, and what Ruby on Rails effectively is it is a collection of pre-written scripts that help take care of a lot of the basic fundamental work that needs to be done on server-side applications for you in sort of an automatic fashion. Here, for example, if we jump back over to the command line and look at those 3 commands I executed. The first command that I executed on the command line was this command, Rails new colors. What I was essentially doing there was I was using the Ruby on Rails framework, which I already had installed and set up on my computer, and I was telling it that I wanted to generate a new project called Colors. When I told it this, it didn't actually know what the Colors project was. Basically, all it did at that point when I asked for it was to create sort of a default structure for a project. In a lot of our PHP examples, we had questions about where do we store style sheets, where do we store the pages for this part of it, where do we store the pages for that part of it. One of the things that's interesting about a Rails project is that in a Rails project, there's a place for everything, and everything has a very specific place. If we take a look here at the actual directory that was created for me when I ran that command, Rails new colors, this is effectively what it gave me. Lots of folders with lots of files already built into them. A lot of these things are scripts and fundamentals to the framework itself that allows a Ruby on Rails application to actually function. But at that point, after I had executed that command, all I had really done was created this basic framework. There was nothing about it that was specific to colors. That's what came next. The next command that I executed was this one, where I said Rails G scaffold color name red value, green value, blue value. This is probably one of the most crucial steps I did because this is really what sort of made my little application, my little colors application here, what it is. When I typed Rails G, I was again using the Rails command that I had already installed and set up on my computer. The letter G actually stands for generate. And here, what I told it was called a scaffold is what you and I in PHP have previously been calling a CRUD. So when I told Rails generate a scaffold, it understood that what I wanted was an index page, a new page, an edit page, a destroy page, all of those same basic things. Where I put the word color with a capital C in here, what I was actually at that point doing was letting Rails know that what I wanted to do was create a new object type called color, basically a new class. Again, very much like we did in PHP, sort of by hand. The difference is here, because of some of the interesting aspects of the Ruby language, Rails was actually able to create a color class for me sort of on the fly without me having to go through and necessarily write it by hand. Technically, that is something we actually could have come pretty close to accomplishing on our own in PHP if we had wanted to. We just never went quite that far with it. Everything else after the word color that I put there in that command then, when I wrote name, red value, green value, blue value, I was essentially at that point telling it the different attributes that I wanted to be available for that particular object. So this overall command is saying I want an index page, new page, edit page, destroy page. I want it all to work for a type of object called color, and every color is going to have a name, a red value, a green value, and a blue value is what that all boils down to. Now here, when I said name, red value, green value, blue value, I was also accomplishing part of a next step, and that next step was actually setting up my database. When I actually told Rails the attributes that I wanted for my color objects, that also then translated into those would become the column names for storing colors in a database. What the next command I executed then was rake db migrate was basically telling Rails to take the information that it had gathered from that previous command and to actually apply it to a database for me. What database? Well, Rails projects come with their own little built-in development database, so nothing extra really needed to be set up for that. So overall, those, 3-4 commands that I executed were able to get us very, very close to where we actually are with our PHP Colors project right now. And I was able to do that really just in a matter of minutes. Is Ruby on Rails just super easy to use? Well, certainly parts of it are. Setting up a simple CRUD, like we just did, obviously is a very, very easy thing to do. But does that mean that everything in Rails is easy to do? No, certainly not. Rails is a very big subject, all on its own. First of all, it requires pretty extensive knowledge of the Ruby language. So if you don't know the Ruby language, you really need to learn that before you should attempt to learn the Rails framework. Rails also, of course, has some of its own complications, some of its own very strong opinions on the way things should be done. And as long as you're doing things those ways, Rails generally will make life relatively easy on you. But if for one reason or another you decide that you need to go about doing things a different way, then things can get quite a bit more complicated. Overall, what the creators of Rails were shooting for when they developed it was they basically wanted to put together more or less a set of scripts that would take care of the 80% of every project that is generally identical or very, very similar when you go from one application to another. Things like putting together a CRUD, for example. Just about any project you ever work on the web, any server-side project you ever work on is most likely going to involve creating multiple CRUDs for different types of data that particular application is going to need to work with, is going to need to be able to handle. So if that's something that we have to do so often, if it's such a crucial central aspect of most applications, why not go ahead and spend a little bit of time creating a script that could take care of that for us? That's basically what they did when they created Rails. But that, of course, is only 80%. Well, I guess I shouldn't belittle that. 80% is 80%. That is a good chunk of every project. But the other 20%, basically the parts of each project that are generally unique to that individual project, those are things that Rails doesn't offer any particular advantage to. So those are still things that very much have to be thought out, have to be coded, have to be written by hand. So Rails takes care of a lot of the boilerplate for you, takes care of a lot of the repetitive, boring aspects of web development for you, but it certainly doesn't do everything for you. So why bother telling you about Ruby on Rails here? We've spent all this time talking about PHP. Why do I pull out this Rails topic right here towards the end? Oh, basically, I just wanted to try and make you feel bad. No, that's of course not really the reason. The reason is the future. As you get closer here to the end of your semester in PHP class, you might have questions about, where do I go from here? What's the next thing that I want to learn? Well, first of all, the first thing I would certainly encourage you to do is keep working in PHP. We have hopefully in this class laid down a good foundation of knowledge in PHP that you can now build upon, but there's still lots and lots in PHP for you to learn. We have definitely not reached the end of everything there is to PHP. But what else about the future? Well, just like a good carpenter might use more than one type of hammer, a good web developer probably is going to need to have access to more than one server-side scripting language. So knowing PHP is certainly fantastic and is not something that should be bypassed or forgotten about. But by itself, it may not always be the best solution. So knowing other server-side scripting languages as well can also be a tremendous advantage. What I would recommend from this point, besides going on and continuing your practice with PHP, would be to next go on and learn the Ruby programming language. Once you've learned the Ruby programming language, then Ruby on Rails will become another possible tool that you could pick up. In some of the places where PHP is weak, those are the exact same places where Ruby on Rails seems to be strong, and vice versa. So knowing both of those two, knowing PHP and Ruby on Rails, I feel gives you a very good breadth to your server-side scripting experience and leaves you in a good position where you'll be able to accomplish most all of the goals on server-side scripting that you may find yourself needing to accomplish. If you are interested in a future semester of taking a class in Ruby or taking a class in Ruby on Rails, you can of course check out our catalog, check out the TCC class schedule, or you can contact me. Just send me an email and I'll be happy to let you know when either of those two classes will be available.